Alright, y'all, we're going to sew up a Playdate Skort today. I'm sewing up one for baby girl, which means it's a youth size, but all the pieces and the construction are the same on the youth and adult, so it should not make a very big difference if you're sewing up an adult instead of a youth. We're starting out with the front skirt pockets. If you did this option, right sides together with your front skirt piece and your pocket lining piece. I'm using a French terry here, so hopefully you can tell the front from the back pretty easily. The more white side is the wrong side. So we have them right sides together, pinned along this little front diagonal, and that's where we're going to stitch. I'm going to be using my serger on almost all of the construction here. You can use your sewing machine, no problem. You want to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance for almost every piece. So if you're using a serger like me, that means you're going to trim off, you're going to let your machine trim off 1/4 inch. That is rather important. Do not just use the serger with nothing cutting it off. Your skirt will end up too big and your pieces will not fit together. So if you're using a serger, which ends, usually your serger ends with 1/4 inch seam. So you're going to want to trim off the rest of that seam allowance, which is another 1/4 inch. If you're using a sewing machine, just make sure that your stitch stretches as much as your fabric. That way, when you go to put your skirt on and your fabric stretches, your stitch also stretches. We're going to press. I always press it before opening it up, and then I open it up and press it again. You can understitch here, so you can press the seam allowance to the pocket lining and stitch it to the pocket lining, or you can top stitch, so you can, again, you're going to press it just like this, no matter what. Then you're going to open it up and press it again. You can understitch here, so stitch it just to the lining, or you can press it like this, where it's going to end up in the end, and top stitch here so that you can see the stitching when it's being worn. Whatever your preference is. I top stitched this one. I used my cover stitch. My cover stitch machine is not in the shot, so anytime I use my cover stitch, it's going to be off camera. Okay, so what we're going to do now is use our pocket piece. We're going to create French seams here. So you can line them up like this to make sure you're doing the right pocket piece. This is how it's going to end up, correct? But what we're going to do, instead of just stitching it here, which you can do if that's what you want, we're going to put them wrong sides together and stitch them together with wrong sides together. And we're only going to use 1/4 inch seam allowance here. If you're using a sewing machine and 1/4 inch is really small and you're having a difficult time, you can take a little bit bigger seam allowance. Your pocket will just be a little bit smaller. If you're using a serger like me, 1/4 inch seam allowance should be nice and easy. So you just don't want to trim anything off this time. You want your blade on your serger to just skim the very edge of your pieces. Again, this is a little bit backwards than what we're normally going for. You are wrong sides together on the pocket piece and the pocket lining piece. I like to create French seams on my pockets. I don't always do it, but it's a nice way for you to not feel the seam on your thighs when you're wearing it, and also not have the seam when you put your hands into the pockets. If it doesn't bother you either way, you can sew them whichever way you want. We're going to definitely give this a press. Give it a press before you flip it inside out, and then flip it again, and then press it again once you have flipped it like this. Once we've given it a nice press, we're just going to top stitch it, which I again did on my cover stitch machine. And you just want to make sure your stitch is beyond your seam allowance. So your 1/4 inch seam allowance, you're going to stitch right outside the 1/4 inch seam allowance, like 3/8. That way you don't have your seam allowance touching your skin on the inside, and you don't have it when you put your hand inside either. So it's a nice, pretty finish for your pockets. One thing you can also do just for a different look is top stitch here on your main through the front skirt piece and the pocket. It's just a little decorative detail that if you want to have, you can. Just another way you can finish it out for a different look. Press one more time after you've stitched, especially because we've stitched these pockets a lot. So your fabric is bound to stretch out a little bit. So make sure you're pressing after every stitch. That way they're still going to line up perfectly when you go for this step. If you find that your pocket is now a little bit big, your fabric has stretched out. One way to combat that is to make sure that you're pressing after every stitch. So don't flip it inside out and top stitch without pressing in between, because if it's grown a little bit and then you sew it again, it's going to grow even more, and that press isn't going to be able to have it pop back the same as if you press after every stitch. So once we're all done pressing, we're just going to align the pocket to our main front skirt piece, and it basically makes a rectangle, right? The top aligns all along the top and the sides align all along the sides. Now the adult is a little bit curvier than the youth that I'm doing here, just because adults are curvier than youths. So, but it does still basically make a rectangular shape. If your pocket ends up a little bit bigger, your fabric stretched out no matter all the pressing, trim your pocket down to the exact size of your skirt piece. If you don't, it's going to bunch up underneath and it's going to make your pockets bunchy, and you're not going to be happy with that. So make sure they lay nice and flat and smooth. We're just going to baste them here. Basting is the longest straight stitch your machine does. Most it's a 5 stitch length, and that's just going to temporarily hold it in place. I like to baste at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and this just does a little bit better job holding it perfectly in place than pins or clips. So we're just going to go across the top and down the sides where there's multiple layers on the pocket. One reason why I like basting at a 1/4 inch is because later on, when I'm sewing these seams, a 1/4 inch is where I like my blade for my serger. So it's a nice, easy guide just to remind me there's a 1/4 inch. That's where I want my serger to be trimming at. So just a little cheat you can give yourself, especially if you're new to sewing and you have a harder time keeping your seam allowance really even. It's really helpful to have that little cheat. All right, next we're going to sew up the side seams. So if you did not do skirt pockets, this is where you'll start. This will be your first step. We're just going to take our back piece and align it with our front piece, right sides together, and pin or clip all down the side seams. I'm doing the mini length here, if you're wondering. The curved thigh length obviously has a curved bottom hem. The mini length does curve a tiny bit, and that's just because we are curvy. And so I curve it down in the back to help give the booty a little bit more coverage. And then on the youth and the adult, the front curves down just a little bit for bellies to have a little bit of length and curving. And when you wear it, it looks pretty straight, depending on how curvy you are in the front or the back. It looks straight, but that's why it has a slight curve on the front and the back. It's just because if we have curves like a booty, then it needs that length to travel around those curves. So if you're pinning it up and you're thinking, why is this back curved down? I did the mini length. It's supposed to be straight across. That's why. That is also why the back is a little bit longer than the front on the mini length and the curved thigh, because our booty is usually much more curvy than our front. So now I'm going to zip down these side seams, again using the normal 1/2 inch seam allowance. You can see I'm trimming off 1/4 inch. And if you used 1/4 inch on your basting stitches, it's a really easy guide to follow. Again, you can stitch this on your sewing machine as well, still using the 1/2 inch seam allowance, and just making sure that if your fabric has vertical stretch, your stitch that you chose stretches just as much as your fabric. I'm using French terry here. This French terry actually has a tiny bit of vertical stretch. Some don't have any, and this one just happens to be a thinner French terry that has quite a lot of stretch for a French terry. It's a poly rayon, I believe. Could be wrong though. I ordered this a really long time ago. I think it's from Raspberry Creek Fabrics forever ago. I've used little pieces of this for my daughter so many times. All right, we're going to give that a press. You can top stitch these side seams. If you did pockets, you might want to top stitch just to keep those thicker seam allowances where you want them, but you don't have to. Now we're going to move on to the undershorts. You can create this just a skirt and completely leave the shorts off if you don't want the shorts underneath. But here we are sewing up the shorts. I also did a pocket on the undershorts. It's great for like a little athletic look. We're going to start by pressing the top edge of the pocket piece 1/2 inch to the wrong side, and then we're going to stitch it. I'm going to do it on my cover stitch, so you won't see me do that, but here they are. And then you're going to press it one more time after you have hemmed that top edge. These little notches are there just so we can keep all of our pieces going the correct way. The notch goes towards the back. It aligns to the back piece, and it helps us not only make sure we're attaching the back to the back and the front to the front, but also to make sure we are keeping 2 mirror images the whole time. Depending on your fabric, if it doesn't have a front and back side, it can get a little confusing. One day, maybe I will be able to make a sewing video without knocking my phone and making it wiggle around for y'all, but we haven't got there yet, y'all. We're working on it. It's been years of me making these videos, and I still have such a hard time not accidentally hitting the camera when it's right in between my face and the sewing machine. All we're doing is lining up the pocket to the bottom of the piece, and of course your notches should align as well. And now we're just basting them together. We're going to treat it as one piece from now on, and you'll have a little pocket. The pockets are pretty big on them. The youth is obviously a little bit smaller than the adult, but I did try to make it big enough to fit most cell phones. It could definitely fit key or ID or money. So There you go. I'm not sure if it's big enough to squeeze a tennis ball in. Maybe if you had pretty stretchy fabric, you could fit a tennis ball in there. It's been a long time since I played tennis, y'all, so I'm not sure. On the adult, the pocket is a little bit bigger. It's definitely big enough to fit a phone, and any other goodies you need for sure. I think you might be able to stick a whole water bottle in the adult one. I do not like tiny pockets. If you've been sewing up my patterns for a long time, you know I like a big pocket. Make sure you press these after you baste. You usually don't need to baste very much if you are, press after basting. It usually doesn't make fabric stretch out. But if you picked something a little stretchier, mine is a little stretchier here. The white is a cotton spandex. And the pink is like a ribbed knit. And that pink rib knit definitely wanted to grow on me. So I pressed both of these afterwards. The shorts on this skort are not as tight as traditional leggings. I would say they're snug, but they are not tight. So you don't need to pick super stretchy fabric. I thought cotton spandex worked perfect. You could also use an athletic knit perfectly fine. But if you want them as tight as leggings, I would suggest grading down a size, because I did not make them as tight as leggings. I know a lot of ready-to-wear skorts have tighter shorts, but baby girl did not want that. She did not want the shorts to be tight. She just wanted them to make sure her underwear weren't showing. And so what baby girl wants, baby girl gets. Y'all know that. So that is why the shorts are not as tight as leggings. I did make them snug though, so that they're snug enough that they shouldn't show undies like in the thigh area. They should be tight enough on the thighs that there's no gaping. So it should keep everything all tucked up and covered. Now we are taking this side piece and putting it right sides together to our front shorts piece. The front shorts piece and the back piece have all the curve to them, while the side piece have just straight seams. So there is a little bit of easing in to these. It should be the same. You shouldn't have to stretch anything. But since one is straight and one has a little curve, it's going to be a little easing in. Make sure when you're sewing these seams, you are taking that full 1/2 inch seam allowance. It will make a really big difference on these little shorts, because again, I did not make them tight. If you only take a 1/4 inch here, it's going to make these shorts too big, because you think, oh, it's only a little tiny piece, but it's a 1/4 inch on each piece. So that's the front piece, the side on the front, the side on the back, and the back piece. And then it's on the other leg as well. You're going to make these shorts 2 inches bigger if you don't take that full 1/2 inch seam allowance. If you only take a 1/4 inch seam allowance, they're going to end up 2 inches bigger than what they're supposed to. So make sure to take that full 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once you've sewn up, give it a good press. You can top stitch the seam allowance. The ones that I did top stitch, I preferred to press the seam allowance toward the front and the back of the shorts and top stitch the seam allowance going away from that side piece. I thought it worked the best that way with the bulk on the pocket piece. Of course, you can do these shorts without the pocket piece. It still has the side piece, but there's no reason that you absolutely have to do the pocket. It's just an option. Now we're right sides together with this little side panel and the back piece. Again, the back piece is going to have a little bit of a curve to it, while the side panel piece is going to be straight. They do have notches to align as well. And once we're all lined up and pinned or clipped, we're just going to stitch it again with that 1/2 inch seam allowance. You can use your sewing machine again here. Just make sure you take the full 1/2 inch seam allowance and you're using a stitch that is as stretchy as your fabric is. Since we're doing vertical stitching, you just need to make sure that your stitches stretch as much as your fabric does vertically. If you use something super stretchy for the shorts, they're going to feel looser as well. If you use like a super stretchy rib knit versus something a little more stable. Press this seam. Again, I like to press it away from the little side panel. Again, you can top stitch this seam. I prefer to top stitch them this way, away from the side panel. I did not top stitch this pair for baby girl. Right sides together, we're going to pin or clip the inseam of the shorts. I forgot to mention that I did the shortest inseam on these ones. Since I was doing the mini length, I did the shorter length. I prefer to do the shorter length on both the mini and the curved thigh. If you do the longer length on either of those, you're going to see the shorts stick out, which can be a very cute little athletic look if that's what you're going for. If you don't want to be able to see the shorts underneath, you're going to have to pick that shorter inseam on both the youth and the adult. Again, 1/2 inch seam allowance here. Now once we're all sewn up, we're going to flip one of the shorts right sides out, and we're going to leave the other leg. I said one of the shorts, I meant one of the legs. One of the legs right sides out and leave the other leg wrong sides out. Okay. The one that you flipped right sides out, you're going to slide into the one that is wrong sides out. This should put them right sides together, and we're going to align them all throughout the crotch. So I'm starting here at the inseams, lining up those seam allowances. I like to nest these seams personally, so I flip one towards the front and one towards the back. And this is, I think that's the center front. And I'm just aligning these front crotch curves, pinning and clipping, and now this is the center back. They should be exactly the same. They're just two mirror images of each other. So should be no easing in or anything. It should be a really easy fit together here. And now we're going to stitch the crotch curve up using that 1/2 inch seam allowance. This is what it looks like and where we're going to be sewing. It's kind of like the big U shape, right? You can start from the front or the back and then just go through the inseam up into the, covering the whole U shape here. This is a seam that kind of gets a lot of wear and tear sometimes. So you can press this and top stitch it. If you find that your body shape puts a lot of tension on the crotch seam, it's one that often people need to kind of reinforce with a top stitch. Now once again, these aren't super tight, so it shouldn't have a lot of tension here. But if you find you're constantly repairing crotch seams, here's your chance to top stitch it once you have pressed this seam. Now our shorts really look like a little pair of shorts, right? I like to take the time right now to mark the front and back in some way. So I have this little stamp that I have for my kids that I will stamp to show them it's the back. If you don't have anything like that, you can use a little ribbon tag, or any way. Just stick a pin in there, stick a clip. Sometimes it just is easier to have it marked later on. I did buttonholes here, so I pressed interfacing to the center and did buttonholes. That way I can put my drawstring through it later. If you need help with buttonholes, we have a whole blog post with lots of tips and tricks on patternsforpirates.com. Right sides together, stitch into a circle. This is our waistband piece. Next up, we're going to fold it wrong sides together, and I have already pressed mine. I pressed mine after doing the buttonholes. But if you haven't pressed yours, now's your time to press. So we are going to mark our skirt and our waistband into even quarter marks. So I'm lining up the very front center with the very back. I'm using the seam for my back. You can use it as the side point as well. It doesn't matter, wherever you like the seam. And you're just marking the center front, center back, and sides. I like to cut all my pieces on a fold with a little notch. So that's why you see the little notch at the waistband. And then I do a single notch for the front on the skirt, and I do a double notch on the back. It's a really, really great habit to pick up because it's super quick and easy and simple while you're cutting out. And then it just saves you the time of trying to figure out which piece is your front and back ever and marking the center front and center back. It's already done for you. So I highly recommend trying that out. The side seams on this one are the quarter point on the youth. A lot of patterns I make the back a little bit wider than the front. On this one, it is not the case. Now the adult, the back is wider than the front. We just get curvier in the adult. Got more curves to consider. The waistband should be the same circumference as the skirt. If you cut everything out super accurately and sewed everything with a super accurate seam allowance. So you should not need to stretch or ease anything in. Should be exactly the same. We're going to get the gathers from the elastic. So the waistband is just as wide as the skirt. You can pin or clip here. If you're using fabric that is slippery at all or difficult to work with, maybe it's curling up, anything like that, or if you're just a beginner and it's difficult for you to keep multiple layers together, this is a really good time to baste the waistband to the skirt. The only thing you have to remember is just to leave 1 to 2 inches unsewn even on the basting stitch. But once again, now's a good little opportunity to baste the waistband to the skirt before adding one more layer, okay? Here's where a lot of my testers fumbled a little bit because it is unusual, but you are going to put the wrong side of your shorts to your waistband. We're so conditioned to do right sides together all the time, but you're going to put the wrong side of your shorts touching the waistband. There is no side seam to mark on the shorts, but the side point is right in the middle of that side panel for you. So I'm just finding the center of the side panel. You can also put your center front and center back to mark your side on your shorts. The shorts are smaller than the skirt and the waistband. So after you mark it into quarter points and you pin or clip the quarter points, you'll notice that the shorts are smaller and that it will have to stretch to fit to the waistband. It's not a ton, because I didn't want the shorts to really need to be a super high stretch fabric. I wanted you to be able to use something like French terry if you wanted to buy all the same fabric for the mane and for the shorts. I didn't want to only be able to use super stretchy fabrics. So I tried to make it not stretch too much to the waistband, but you do need to stretch and clip in between. We're going to stitch all the way around this once we're done pinning it and clipping it, except we're going to leave 1 to 2 inches unsewn. I usually like to pick in the back. I don't know why, I just do. The way I've always done it, I guess. It's just habit. All right, we're finally all clipped up here. I'm going to use my serger again. If you are not confident in sewing through all these layers and keeping your seam allowance really nice and tight, you can certainly use your sewing machine. And you can even use a straight stitch on your sewing machine, because we're going to stretch those shorts to fit the waistband and the skirt. And you won't ever need to stretch the waistband and the skirt beyond its full width, even getting on and off and moving around and everything. So you can use a straight stitch if you have a lot more control on your sewing machine than your serger, which is the case if you're new to sewing or new to using a serger. If you're really confident you can get a really nice perfect seam allowance on your serger, you can go for it and use your serger. Again, we're doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so we are trimming off the 1/4 inch. It is really important to make sure all of your seam allowance around the top is really even, because what we're doing is we're creating a spot for that elastic to go in the waistband. And if it's uneven, it's going to do one of 2 things. If your seam allowance is too small, you're going to have gaping in your waistband and it's going to bunch up. And you're not going to like the way that looks. If you use your seam allowance and it's too big of a seam allowance, then you're not going to be able to fit your elastic in, and it's going to be a nightmare trying to get your elastic even just threaded through that waistband. So it is really important to have a really accurate seam allowance here. I give a teeny tiny bit of wiggle room on your waistband, but you can't give very much, because if it's too big, it looks sloppy and messy and bunchy. And if it's too tight, it's really difficult to get the elastic through. So again, you can do one of 2 things. If the serger is difficult for you, you can baste it at 1/4 inch, and that gives you exactly where your blade should be cutting off all around the whole thing. Or you can just stitch it on your sewing machine. No matter where you're stitching it, you are going to leave the 1 to 2 inch hole, and you're going to stretch the shorts to fit the waistband and skirt. Now is a great time to give a good press, especially if you stitched it with a serger or a sewing machine. If you basted it, it's not quite as important, but you can give it a good press here. And I like to flip it like this to feed in my elastic. You don't have to. You can feed in the elastic with it how you sewed it. I just think it's easier this way. So I like to flip it right sides out and then feed my elastic in. I'm using this little bodkin tool, I think is what it's called. You can use something like this, or you can just use a big safety pin as well. You do want to make sure that your elastic doesn't get twisted or anything. I prefer to use a knit elastic. That's what both patterns are suggesting you use, and that's what the elastic measurement guides you to use. If you're using a different kind of elastic, like non-roll elastic, you are probably going to want to loosen your elastic measurement because that tends to feel a lot tighter than a knit elastic. Me and baby girl prefer a knit elastic because it's softer and stretchier, and we're babies and we like comfort. So I like to use a knit elastic, and it's nice and soft and stretchy. One thing about a knit elastic is, though, you really do need to top stitch it, because if you don't, it will twist and turn in the washing machine with wear. Once we're all threaded through and you're sure that you haven't twisted or turned your elastic, I'm going to overlap them just a little bit and use a really wide zigzag to stitch them together. If you are not planning on top stitching your elastic, you want to make sure this is nice and secure so it doesn't pop as it's stretched and worn and gets tugged on and off. If you are top stitching the elastic, it's not quite as important. You don't have to worry about it very much. Trim off any excess you have just to get rid of the bulk. And then you're going to tug your elastic all the way inside the waistband, just like this. And now we're going to make sure too, I like to kind of tug my elastic where there's no gathers at that little opening section. So where I still need to sew, I kind of smooth it out. And I'm going to flip it how it was when I was sewing, just like this. I'm just going to close this section up. Again, it's important to make sure your seam allowances are really nice and even. So I'm going to be going over the section where I kind of came off the machine and came onto the machine where I wasn't taking that full seam allowance. If you basted the waistband to the skirt, the waistband, shorts, and skirt together, now is your opportunity to do your final stitch around the entire circle as well. Give it a nice press once you have tugged it a few times. So you see I kind of move my hands around and just kind of tug, 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 tug. That just evens out the gathers all around the skirt. And we're going to give it a nice press, pressing the waistband up and everything else down. The seam allowance, the shorts, the skirt all go down and the waistband goes up. It is really important to give it a press before you top stitch if you're going to top stitch it. I also think it helps with the gathering underneath not look quite so poofy. It is a lot, right? Especially if you're using a French Terrier sweatshirt or scuba, something a little bit thicker. Those gathers tend to get a little bulky, so giving it a good press really helps it lay nicely and better. For top stitching, you can use your sewing machine. You don't need a stretch stitch because what we're going to do is stretch out our waistband while we're stitching, and so it should stretch with the elastic just fine. So we're going to pull on the front and the back with the same amount of tension until there's no gathers, and then let the sewing machine feed dogs pull our fabric through. So I am not pulling the fabric through at all. I am just stretching the fabric until there's no more gathers and then letting the machine pull it through. I just saw the wonderful Dana. I think her Instagram screen name, I'm sounding very old right now, is the Slippery Chicken. I think I shared her story the other day because she had this little gizmo I have never seen before that I would have absolutely loved as a beginner, I can stitch a waistband now like this, no problem. It's super simple and easy to me now, but when I was a beginner, this was very difficult for me. I felt like I needed 2 more arms somehow to get it even and going through the machine nicely and keeping my seam allowance, and just to get a really pretty result, I felt like I needed 1 to 2 more arms. And what this little gadget did was it slipped onto your sewing machine and stretched the waistband for you, basically. She basically didn't need to hold anything while it was stitching the waistband, and it was amazing. So if you struggle with this, you can go to my Instagram and see if you can find it, or see if you can find I think it's the slippery chicken, something like that. It's Dana. I share her all the time. She's one of our testers and she admins for my Facebook group. She is absolutely wonderful. I'll see if I can go back and share it again too when this pattern releases. But it would be wonderful for a beginner who hasn't built this skill set yet. Then you would never build the skill set, but why would you if you had the gadget? So there you go. I'm stitching another row. I like 2 rows. I like one at the top, one at the bottom. You can really stitch as many stitch lines as you want. You could do one every 1/4 of an inch if you wanted. You could just do one down the center or one on the top. It's really whatever you like visually. Sometimes I'll do 3 just because I like the look. It's literally just however many you want. But this will keep your elastic from twisting and turning, especially if you're like me and you prefer a knit elastic, because those knit elastics do tend to twist and turn and fold up because they're softer. This way, you get the softer, stretchier elastic, but it doesn't ever move. If you don't want to top stitch, but you still want to use knit elastic, you can just stitch in the ditch. I would recommend doing stitch in the ditch along the back seam, just vertically on your waistband. And then I would do it again at the side seams and the front. If you really don't want to do it at the front, you don't have to. But depending on the size, you really need to stitch it down a few times to make sure it doesn't twist and turn and fold up on you. It's important again to do a press after you top stitch. Now we're going to press the shorts up 1/2 inch on both legs, and then the skirt also 1/2 inch, just like that. And we're going to hem them all up. I'm going to use my cover stitch again, so it will be off camera. You can use your sewing machine. Again, you just want to make sure the stitch that you're using stretches as much as your fabric. And since this is a horizontal stitch, it probably needs to stretch more than all those other. So if you're unsure if your stitch will work, you just need to take a scrap, stitch it up, and then stretch your fabric. If your stitches pop, it's not stretching enough. One way to cheat stretch stitch, if you try, let's say, a zigzag or whatever, and it's not stretchy enough, is you can shorten the stitch length and make it a little wider, and that should make it stretch more. This is the drawstring. You can use a pre-made drawstring. I will very often use like shoelaces. You can also use a twill tape, whatever you like, right? This is a really easy way to make your own drawstring though. This is the one piece where we're going to use a little bit smaller seam allowance. I trim off only about 1/8 of an inch, and depending on your fabric, how thick it is, if you're using like a French terry, you might even only want to take 1/4 of an inch seam allowance here. I'm using a really stretchy rib knit, so it's no problem. I took almost the full 1/2 inch here. because it's nice and stretchy and thin, it was going to be really easy to turn right sides out. If it's a thicker fabric, or like the texture of French terry is not very slippery, it's a lot more difficult to turn inside out. And so if you're using a fabric that is thicker or textured, I would use a smaller seam allowance. Now that will mean your drawstring is a little bit thicker, but you will not be cursing and cussing while you're trying to flip it inside out. So that's what I always go for. I'm just using a safety pin here. You can use whatever method you like best for turning thin little tubes. I know a lot of people will use like chopsticks, straws, all sorts of doodads. I've never quite moved on from a good old safety pin. That's it. I've tried other turning tools, and you know what? It's just, I feel like a nice safety pin is the quickest and the easiest. But whatever your favorite way to turn little tubes, now's your chance to shine. There you go. This drawstring measurement is long enough that you can use a non-stretch fabric as well. So if you want to use twill tape or a shoelace that doesn't stretch, this drawstring measurement will be long enough. If you're using a super stretchy fabric like me, you might even want to trim some of the drawstring down. I would suggest just throwing it in, wearing it, tying it up, and if it seems a little bit long to you, since maybe your fabric stretched out, which it often does with sewing, and then as you're tugging it, pulling it right sides out, you know, sometimes it'll grow and grow, even if you press it afterwards, just because that's the nature of stretch fabric. You can always trim a little bit off before you finish the ends. Again, I'm just leaving this safety pin on. You can use whatever feeding tool you like to feed it through your waistband. I love a drawstring, y'all. If there's an option to add a drawstring, I'm usually like 100% for it every time. Baby girl doesn't like them as much. It kills me a little bit. But she wanted one on this one. I think it was the pink. I think the pink won her over to the drawstring on this one. I really like it for baby girl, even though she doesn't love the way it looks all the time, because she's super thin. And so even with grading down, her waist, I think her waist measures like a size 5, where her booty measures like a size 10. I can't really make the elastic tight enough for her waist and still be able to comfortably get up and over, you know, on and off her booty. And so I usually do her waist elastic measurement around a 6 or a 7, and then the drawstring can bring it in the rest of the way. It's a really good way too if you're trying to get a little more growing room. If you're, you know, maybe doing a size up than what they actually wear, the drawstring will make it to where it will fit them now. And then later on, once they're a little bit bigger, it'll still fit them. I love a drawstring for me for the same reason. I hate tight elastic, y'all. Get out with some tight elastic. I do not want anything squeezing me. So I like a looser elastic, and then I can always pull the drawstring a little tighter if I'm a little thinner that day, because we know as an adult women, day to day, our waist measurements can vary wildly. So this is how I like to finish my drawstrings. I like to trim them how I want and tie them in a knot. It is not the prettiest, cleanest finish. It's my favorite. If you want to tuck in the ends and stitch it, you absolutely can. I hate doing that. I hate doing that. I just trim them and tie them in a knot. I like the way it looks, and it takes me 2 seconds. So if you're looking at this and thinking, gasp, That is not a very nice finish. I'm sorry. That's my favorite. That's what I like to do. I always like to stitch in the ditch on the back center seam right here, just to make sure that drawstring ain't ever going to be pulled out all the way, because I don't want to feed it back through. And sometimes it happens. We have a cat and he loves drawstrings. He'll attack them even just like when they're sitting in the dirty clothes, not moving. So he has pulled out more than one drawstring. So I like to tack them down at that back center seam to make sure the kid's not pulling them out, the washing machine's not pulling them out, the cat's not going to pull them out. So there we go. I love a little drawstring. I just think it's so cute. All right, now all we have to do is hem the skirt and the shorts. I used my cover stitch, so I'm sorry that's not on camera, but you can use your cover stitch if you're lucky enough to have one, or your sewing machine. You just need a stretch stitch that stretches as much as your fabric does. I love a triple step zigzag for super stretchy, and I usually just use a regular zigzag for medium stretch. Here's our little pocket. Perfect for our secret treasures. And our skirt pockets for the ones we need to get to a little quicker. And we're all done up. I hope you love your Playdate Skort. This is one of my daughter's very favorite styles, and I hope you love it. If you sew one up, please share with us on your favorite social media and tag us so we can see it and give you a big applause.